Okay, you're all very welcome to our first community of practice for this quarter. For those of you who've joined us before, we've been online from September, October, November, and hopefully you'll see a red thread of logic running through the discussion. So just to introduce myself, Claire McBride, I'm head of the Enterprise Academy, and we're delighted to welcome you all today for a really, really important topic that I don't mind saying we ourselves at the Enterprise Academy have struggled with. So in ways, we're eating our own dog food here at the presentation today. So just to give you an idea of the programme, in essence, the Collaborative Talent Development Community of Practice is really fundamentally about enabling people to reach their full potential. So those people could be undergraduates, so students, they could be postgrad full-time, postgrad part-time, earner learners. They could be enterprise partners or sectoral partners. So it's really about whether it's the individual or the organisation or both reaching their full potential. So how do we deliver, design, co-design, develop programs, whether they be, as I say, undergraduate, postgraduate or otherwise, to help them do that. At an enterprise level, it's about realising strategic intent. And I think we realise a little bit about what we're trying to do on the strategic front as well. So I'm going to hand over to Brian in a moment to introduce our Enterprise Academy team. And as I say today, in general, we have the enterprise voice speaking to faculty and professional services colleagues through this community of practice. We have a future talent forum, which does the opposite. Effectively, it's faculty and professional services and sharing their voice and their viewpoints and their expertise with our enterprise audience. Today, we've got a hybrid of both. But just to talk a little bit about the Enterprise Academy for those of you who may be less familiar. So we're a business unit here at TU Dublin that focuses on collaborative talent development, particularly for workforce learners, but we also broker connections for learners on campus. So that's a two-way street, and you'll hear more from us, in particular in the January Community of Practice, about that two-way street and bringing the voice of enterprise into our on-campus learners. So we were launched in November 22, so just a year ago, as part of the Convene project. And the Convene project is well understood, I think, across the institution. But fundamentally, that's a HCI-funded project that's all about innovation and agility in higher education. Again, it's something that we all struggle with. So it's nice to innovate. It's probably one of the more enjoyable aspects of what we do. But then we have to commercialise that. We have to deliver the results side of it. And today's conversation is largely about scaffolding that. Agility, part of what we do is as good as it is because we have very tough quality accreditation measures associated with that. But that can actually slow the process down. So part of what we're trying to do in terms of responding to emerging and priority skills needs in the workforce, in enterprise, in our partnership sectors and relationships, is somewhat a task for us on a week-to-week basis in terms of trying to make sure that we've got that agility built in. So in our conversations with enterprise partners, what do we see coming up on a repeat basis? It is that agility. So can you respond to our needs sometime soon, right? And that's generally in a kind of a 3-month window and maybe at the limit 6 months. And the cadence of our processes don't always meet up there. So part of what we're doing at the Enterprise Academy is trying to oil that machine a little bit where we can. And we value our partnership with faculty colleagues and professional services colleagues in endeavouring to do that. Co-design. And again, it's at the core of what we'll talk about today because it's that conversation, it's a constant conversation with sectors, with industry. For some of you who may be more focused on undergraduates, then that might be with careers advisors, teachers, schools, parents, etc. So it's embracing all of that in terms of the logic of what we're talking about, but you'll see a particular emphasis on enterprise and sector in the conversation today. Sectoral and disciplinary knowledge, the research tells us that this is really important from the point of view of informed conversations with our industry counterparts, with our enterprise counterparts. And we have ample measure of that throughout the room today in terms of people's disciplinary knowledge, but also a particular characteristic at TU Dublin, and we hear that from our enterprise partners all the time, is that many of us come from the sectors that we're talking to and partnering with, and that develops and breeds a level of confidence. Applied learning, I think it's what we're known for. If we look at the, the Turn report that I was kind of reviewing last night in preparation for today, or any other report looking at the technological university and what we're about and what distinguishes us, then it is that applied learning. And I think added to that, it is that element of authentic assessment. When we're talking to enterprise partners about that, we call it applied assessment. But naturally enough, we have to develop dual vocabulary systems here. Then the all-important measure of accreditation. So we were talking to partners in Flutter yesterday, senior directors there, about a new programme that we're set to launch in Q1 of next year. So we've been working quite hard on that at the Enterprise Academy. It's a sports tech, analytics and innovation programme. And the interesting thing about it, well, one of the many interesting things about it is that it's cross-disciplinary in nature. So we're delivering it across 3 faculties and 6 schools and 2 campuses for now, but it could have been 3. So that's the complexity that we're trying to navigate. And I suppose talking to colleagues, mostly as we are today, or talking to enterprise partners, that's the job of the Enterprise Academy. So you see here on the left is our 5 faculties, our 25 schools, and our 3 campuses. If you're an enterprise looking into this picture to say, I need a solution, I need it within the next 3 months, I need it to do X, Y, and Z in terms of crossing over a few disciplines, but really trying to achieve my strategic intent and trying to fill my talent pipeline and trying to plug those gaps. This is a complex picture, okay? Looking at colleagues here today, though, and this, you might recognise it if you were at our October community practice that was delivered by our partners in Enterprise Ireland and IDA Ireland, but this is an image shared by Aisling Soden at the IDA. This is the rather complex picture that we are also looking at. So what we're trying to do is build this kind of mediating function in the middle that does deliver expertise and that does deliver scaffolding and support to help you in bridging that gap. So please do contact us and you'll hear from some of our experts today. And as we mill around afterwards, we'll have that conversation as well. I suppose I'd like to welcome back some of our fellowships that I see in the room. The fellowships that you've seen advertised are about that co-design work, essentially looking at what we can do to develop solutions for enterprise, for sectors, and I would say enterprise being commercial or social. But there's lots of mechanisms whereby you can interact with us and we'd be delighted to hear from you. I'm going to close off there because you haven't come to listen to me today, you've come to listen to my colleagues share their expertise and their toolkits. But one of the things that I suppose I wanted to leave you with is this image of shift left. And it comes, my background is in product management and innovation and telecoms, hardware, software services mostly. And I was involved in building a lot of products and services. If you look at Clayton Christensen's stats, 95% of all innovation fails. It's not a great kind of mission to come to work with, but you have to look at innovation as a function of de-risking what we're about to put on the market, right? So if we look at a funnel, classically the funnel is wider at the front end. It's called the fuzzy front end for those of us who are interested. And that's where 80% of the work needs to be done. But we tend to want to rush to the other end and get something out the door because that's the plan and we don't really have time to do the upfront work. But I think today is really about that. It's about pulling back to the fuzzy front end and really interrogating what the need for the market is, whose needs we're addressing, how are we addressing them? And I think there's an all-important piece, whether it be at undergraduate and the go-to-market strategy there with school visits and talking to careers advisors, or whether it be in the world that we operate in, which is that all-important go-to-market strategy. You can build the best product in the world, but if you don't have a way to get it into the hands of the people who need it and can afford it, then it'll fail anyway. So there's a lot to what we're talking about today, and I think the focus is really on that fuzzy front end. The shift left piece is, once you think you've got enough answers to go and spend money, check if you need to shift left again. Are there any questions that are unanswered? Is there anything else that we need to check? And in that regard, I would say to colleagues, faculty colleagues in particular, if there are people that you need to talk to in the sectors or in enterprise, and I realise we've lots of experts in the room who are equally, embedded in their sectors, but please do come to us because I think that's an issue for some people in faculties. We're not clear on who to talk to, and certainly if it's an enterprise or a sectoral function, we're happy to help. I'm going to hand over to Brian.
Thanks, Claire. It's my pleasure to introduce three of our colleagues here today, but just to thank Claire for that introduction, and also to thank Claire for her hard work, her enthusiasm and dedication leading the Enterprise Academy over the course of 2023. So my pleasure to introduce each of our colleagues, and I'll introduce them and call them up maybe one by one. Three great colleagues from the Enterprise Academy: Niamh O'Hora, who is an educational developer at the Enterprise Academy. And Niamh works with enterprise, with faculty and students in co-creating programmes that will future-proof our graduates for the jobs of today and tomorrow. Niamh has expertise in leading diverse teams, in programme design, in enterprise challenges and sustainable solutions, and lots of other things as well. It's great to have you with us, Niamh, if you want to come up and join us here. Thanks, Niamh. Delighted to introduce Dr. Ciara Walsh. Ciara is Senior Engagement Manager dealing with Pharma, MedTech and Food in the Enterprise Academy. Her academic career spans TU Dublin and UCD, where she was a Newman Scholar. She has broad experience as a lecturer, as a workplace coordinator and as a researcher, and she did her PhD in the University of Ulster in microbiology. Outside academia, Ciara has great experience in public affairs and in regulation. She worked in the European Commission, she worked in the OECD, she worked in the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, and I only discovered earlier on from Ciara that she worked for the US Department of Agriculture as well in California. One of Ciara's most recent accomplishments with the Enterprise Academy has been creating a Level 9 postgrad program in brewing and distilling. So, there has been great market demand for that as well. So great to have you with us as well, Ciara, if you want to come up and take your cue as well. And finally, last but not least, my colleague, Dr. Dee Duffy, Senior Engagement Management Manager dealing with retail, tourism and hospitality sectors. Dee has considerable academic, professional and industry experience, and she has extensive market knowledge in retail, tourism and hospitality. Dee has completed a Level 9 postgrad dip in university teaching and learning to understand best practice in education design. And I know that's true, Dee, because we were in the same class doing it. Unlike Dee, unlike myself, Dee then went on and she won a university award for innovation in her professional development module. So great to have you, Dee. Thanks a million. Over to you guys. Thanks, Ciara.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian and Claire, and thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy day to join us today. We are very excited to share some experiences with you in our experience of learner discovery and maybe gauging market demand for courses as early as possible in the design and development life cycle. And that's pretty much why we're here today. We would really like to know maybe or understand a little bit more about the challenges that you face in terms of understanding learners, and then maybe that market demand in education solution design. And that is why I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Hugh, and we want to know what's on your plate. So really where the challenges are from your perspective, okay? And while we talk, we'll give you some time maybe to communicate them on the plates, and we will come back to them then at the end of our discussion. We really want to know maybe your perspectives or your challenges with respect to learner discovery. So I might wait while the plates are being dispersed. Yes. And yeah, maybe if things come to mind as we talk, you could note them on the plate. And we'll come back to the plates. And thank you as well. So maybe just to provide a little bit of context before we drill into some examples and case studies, I'm just here to introduce, and provide a little context from the outside. And thanks for the intro, Brian. I'm an educational developer at the Enterprise Academy. I also lecture on the Creative Digital Media program in Blanchardstown, and my background is user experience design and digital product design. And in the examples that we're going to share with you today, they're pretty much underpinned by a design thinking approach, okay? And this is an approach to problem solving and innovation, and it really puts people at the center of everything we do and the products and services that we're developing. So, you know, in our context, maybe it is about the learners are at the center of everything we do, and in the Enterprise Academy then our enterprise stakeholders and other stakeholders. And it's really about maybe identifying unmet needs and problems that our stakeholders and our learners are experiencing and responding to those problems. Because we know not everything we build is successfully adopted, okay? And really our efforts are centered in this intersection of design thinking, where we've got a perfect storm. Whatever educational solution we're developing is feasible. You know, we've got faculty, school, professional services, technology, all there ready to implement. It's viable, you know, there's a business model, a funding model. It's in alignment with our strategic intent. And also then the desirability part. We know that there's demand. We know there's some kind of demand, and we want to get to that intersection point. And that's what design thinking maybe helps with a little bit as well. Because what we want to avoid, maybe with tons of examples from the tech and the product world, examples like Juicero, a $400 juicing machine. It received about 120 million in Silicon Valley investment. It was sold with a subscription to juicing packs, monthly subscription. And Bloomberg then reported that you could actually just squeeze the packs with your hands. You didn't need the $400 juicing machine. And as I said, lots of examples from the tech and product world. This is what we want to avoid maybe with investing in educational solution design and development, and then a big flop really when it hits the market. You know, if you Google maybe RIP Google, you'll find a site that has like hundreds of Google products that have been discontinued after shipping. For example, Google Glass. That retailed at over $1,000, and it did hit the market after a whole bunch of market research and prototyping and testing with focus groups. But the major feedback when that hit the market was the unstylish design, and then obviously concerns about privacy. But those learnings were taken by Meta, and they pivoted with their smart glasses product with a super stylish collaboration with Ray-Ban. So building on the, I suppose, the maybe failures of Google, and bringing it back then to where we're at. We know that the longevity of some educational programs are at risk due to enrollment numbers and underdeveloped go-to-market strategies. So lots of examples to draw upon from other sectors, but we were bringing it back here because our problem is maybe a lack of go-to-market strategy from the outset, and an understanding of where the demand of some of our solutions lies. And I'd mentioned before, the examples that we're going to share are kind of underpinned by this design thinking mindset, which is characterized by a process as well. The process can vary, lots of different terminology. It is not a linear process as presented, so you can hop from different stages. You're constantly learning as you go and iterating on those learnings. But generally, there is repeated phases. For example, empathize or discover, and that's all about, again, the people that you're designing products and services for, and understanding their challenges and their unmet needs, defining exactly what that challenge is or what you're hoping to address with a solution, coming up with lots of ideas, which is great, But then bringing to life those ideas in something tangible and testing them and getting feedback before you go anywhere else. And you might loop back then to the start of the process again, and eventually getting to some kind of implementation and then learning from that implementation and building it in again. And there's lots of different tools and techniques in an educational context that we can try based around these stages. And that's what we're going to share with you today, some examples. From other sectors, lots of really, really cool examples. So maybe in the empathize kind of stage where we're learning about customers and learners. Heinz did this in the 1980s where they did ethnographic research, and Heinz representatives went out to households during dinner time to observe ketchup consumption at dinner time. And they found that it was young children who consumed the most ketchup, but they didn't have control of the bottle because it was glass. And this led to the squeezy plastic innovation, which was a major hit with the company, and consumption increased by 12% after the release of this product. Then Doug Dietz from General Electric, who was a lead engineer on MRI design and development, he attended hospitals where GE MRIs were installed, and he was horrified to see the anxiety and the stress among people who were getting an MRI, particularly in children, and hospitals reported 80% sedation rates for children who were undergoing MRIs. So he brought these empathize and discovery learnings back to the workshop and prototyped different ideas in terms of maybe offering an experience for young children who were undergoing MRIs, leading to like 9 different types of adventure rooms for MRI facilities. And again, where these were piloted, it led to a reduction in sedation rates in pediatric units. This design thinking mindset is ubiquitous kind of in the tech realm, and Google Ventures have pioneered a 5-day design sprint that they run with innovation companies, where they'll just condense all those phases into 5 days. A lovely example from Savioki, the service robot company, who are at early stages of development. Over a 5-day period, they clarified that with a diverse team from the company, they clarified that they were worried about the point of contact with the service robot and the customer, that initial point of contact. So they came up with lots of ideas. They took one of their early stage prototypes on day 4 of the process, and they used an iPad to express personality, or to give the robot personality. And they also introduced gamification via the iPad as well. So they were still at very early stages of development. And on day 5, they hired 2 hotel rooms, recruited participants, recruited a group of participants, and each participant was asked to ring down to reception to say that they'd forgotten their toothbrush. And it was that point of contact between the service robot and the hotel guest that was observed. And the team were really, really encouraged when the hotel guests were surprised that a service robot brought them their toothbrush. And when they gave positive feedback to the service robot, the robot played music and kind of did a little bit of a dance. And that was the point where they knew, yes, that this is working. And they ditched the gamification because it was confusing. So they brought data to their conversations within this 5-day process. And then finally, this design thinking mindset is pretty much mainstream now in public service design, education, healthcare. Even saw last week with the launch of the action plan for designing better public services, which is underpinned with this co-creation, collaborative design thinking mindset, where we're learning all the time and pivoting based on those learnings. And that kind of brings us back into the education sector, where I am going to hand over to my colleague Ciara, who's going to share her experience from the brewing and distilling sector. Thank you, Ciara. And I'm going to hand this over to you. There we go.
Thank you, Niamh. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Ciara Walsh, and I'm going to talk to you about learner discovery in the brewing and distilling sector in Ireland. So to start with, what is learner discovery. So learner discovery can be defined as a powerful framework in which we can look at our learners' challenges, their constraints, their problems, and look at their needs and wants and the way to build out the best solution to tackle those. So it's really about finding the right path. And as educators, as professionals, as people who build programs, certainly instinctively we feel we know the direction that a program should be built out in. But does that meet all our learners' needs, all our learners' wants? And if we have misalignment, what impact could that have on the outcome of our project? So although it might be tempting to skip the learner discovery phase, it is in fact a crucial part of program development. And at the very least, it gives us an opportunity to validate our assumptions of our learners' needs. So I'm going to talk you through my experience of learner discovery for the brewing and distilling sector. And just to note that I was very privileged to have the time and space to do this through a convened fellowship. I know time is a precious commodity for academics and professionals, so certainly this was the ideal scenario to complete learner discovery. But I started this journey with two questions, and they were, is there a demand for postgraduate programs in brewing and distilling? Certainly anecdotally, I felt there was. The team in the School of Food Science and Environmental Health also felt there was. We were dealing with the sector, and I was a work placement coordinator and lecturing, but I was also placing students within companies, in brewing and distilling companies. And there was often inquiries about opportunities for postgraduate qualifications, for other paths, accredited paths, at which time we had none. The other thing was, if we did have that robust evidence of a need, what would that provision look like if we were to build it? So I started with the empathise phase, which is getting to know your learner. And I was very keen to learn everything about this sector and the potential learners in it. But if you look at the literature on this phase, it actually says you should come to the table open-minded, like a naive and curious outsider. And as someone who knew practically nothing about brewing and distilling, that part was easy. But I soon learned. And I learned that the sector was worth 2.6 billion to the Irish Exchequer, so that's quite a lot. I learned that it expanded by 25% in the 4 years previously, that it was associated with 92,000 jobs, and it was booming, it was thriving. In fact, the growth in this sector was continuing with a predicted 23,000 jobs coming in the next few years. So very good signs. When I looked at the national reports and articles around how the Irish economy was growing, what skills we needed, where the skills deficits were, there was definitely indications that brewing and distilling, we required more formal pathways, more opportunities, and also to be coupled with things like new product development. So the School of Food Science and Environmental Health, and we have some of my colleagues here today, we're very good at new product development. This is one of our areas. So there was a lot of good indications that this would sit very well within the school. So also good signs. When we looked at the current educational provision in this area, nationally, there was 4 programs. So 4 programs to support this thriving, booming sector. So we had a level 5, level 7, 2 level 8s. So we had the BSc in Food Innovation, which is now the BSc in Food Science, which had an undergraduate stream in Brewing and Distilling. There was also one in Carlow, South East Technological University, as it's now known, but nothing in the postgraduate space. So this suggested there was a vacuum and the potential for us to build out. So again, more good signs. Just to note as well, that at the start of my journey, I was very lucky to attend some networking events. And one in particular, and I'm looking at Christine O'Connor because she'll remember this event, we actually got to sit in a room and listen to people in the brewing and distilling sector, the stakeholders, talk about the skills deficits, the skill gaps, future-proofing the sector and opportunities in that space. So that was a really valuable exercise. So I would recommend that. And it was also an opportunity to shake hands with stakeholders, to introduce myself and explain exactly what I was doing to follow up for future discussion, future interviews. And those leads led me to new leads as they introduced me to their network. So that was very useful. So I also completed an industry survey. And this was designed with consideration to discussions with brewing and distilling stakeholders, consultants of brewing and distilling, academics. But even though we didn't have a national provision in Ireland, there was provision online. There was also a UK provision. So I was able to map to their programs, look at their curriculums, look at their delivery. And I used that information to populate surveys for my respondents. So I could list out different areas and ask them if these were areas of interest, and ask them then to priority rank these different areas. So you can see here we hit many different points within the survey. There was actually 29 questions, so lots of questions around each point. But I also wanted to build out information on their current training in-house, obstacles to training, lots of questions around methods of delivery of a potential programme, because this tends to be quite an important question for industry, and priority transferable skills. As is recommended with the design thinking process, I had lots of open questions. So I allowed my respondents to actually tell me what they wanted to tell me, to direct the survey in a certain way. But certainly wherever I had a list, I asked the respondents to tell me what was missing off that list. What priorities are missing? What competencies are missing? What knowledge is missing that you would like to see on that list? So competencies being demonstrable skills in an area, and knowledge being practical or theoretical understanding of an area. So that was a very informative exercise. And because Ireland is a small country, we'd only 117 brewing and distilling companies at the time, it made sense to email all of them, which I did. And it was also put up on LinkedIn, and various stakeholders also put it up on their LinkedIn. So we had about a 34% response rate, so about 40 surveys from the sector. So I wanted to couple this quantitative data, which gives us correlations, patterns, trends, with the qualitative data. So I also conducted interviews with stakeholders. So this, as you know, gives us context, it gives us perspectives, it helps us understand the reasoning of our potential future learners. So the stakeholders range from small, medium enterprise, right through to large companies, to the people working on the floor, to the managers or directors. I also targeted any training department that I found, and I managed to talk to the head of training of the top brewery, the biggest brewery and the biggest distillery in Ireland. Also regulators and umbrella organisations. So a good array of different individuals to get different viewpoints. And as you can see, a lot of these themes build out from my surveys to allow me to get a deeper understanding of the sector in that way. The interviews were usually 30 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on the time. And after I'd asked my questions, I then talked and let the conversation naturally progress to see what else I could learn from my stakeholders. So all this information helped me to define my challenge. It helped me to relook and reframe my question in that human-centred way. So I had good information from reports and articles about potential demand, lots of good signs there. And certainly when I talked to the interviewees, they were very supportive. They said they'd really welcome postgraduate provision in this area because they currently didn't have any choice in the area. And the surveys were more modest. You can see lots of yeses. The question was, of course, do you think anyone in your company would be interested in completing postgraduate programs? So there's a few, don't know, maybe. But I was encouraged overall by these results. One of the interesting things I found when I put the interview data and the survey data together was I was able to develop learning pathways. So I was able to see where the industry was going for training, for upskilling. 33% were training in-house in the traditional way that brewers and distillers always had. 67% were training with the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, which is very high quality online provision. And also 1% are with the Wine Spirits Educational Trust. 2 UK organisations, gold standards in the industry, with really good online provision. But the interviewees were very quick to note, we don't have practical training. We don't have the option to go into a lab and learn. And we had just put in a really nice brewing and distilling lab in TU Dublin, so that was really good for us. We also had this university component. So 8% said they did complete postgraduate training, but because there was none nationally, in spring 2022, they used to go to Harriet Watt in Scotland. Now there is a few other universities in the UK that also provide it, but the people I talked to were going to Harriet Watt. So there seemed to be a niche there, combining theoretical with practical and creating that provision, those postgraduate provision for the sector out of TU Dublin. Just to have a quick look at a few highlights or a few questions out of many. When I looked at things like obstacle to training, 1 and 2 said time. And I think that puts in sharp focus the need for that agile, flexible, customised pathways where you have that self-paced learning. 1 in 5 said cost. Certainly we were looking at funding mechanisms, and 1 in 5 said lack of certainly perceived programs in this area. I think it's interesting to note that 96% didn't say their own personal lack of interest was a reason for not upskilling. When it came to methods of delivery, and again, one question out of many, you can see the industry very strongly signalled we want laboratory components on site. But when it comes to lectures, we're looking for that high flex, that blended, online, recorded provision, as compared to completely online or completely on site in the traditional sense. So I'm not going to get into the details of this, but just to show you how I mapped some of the competencies, knowledge and transferable skills, which can feed into our assessment strategy to create those graduate attributes. For this, for example, is for a postgraduate diploma. But because of the open questions, I also asked, what's missing? And what came back was health and safety and revenue. Now, health and safety is actually a very obvious one, but it didn't occur to me, and I didn't see it on programs in the UK or online either. But when you think about flammable liquids, when you think about heat, when you think about the fact that a lot of these companies have a tourism arm to their business, this is obviously very important. So that was very interesting to note. Things like customs and excise, the regulation were also challenging, and the sector would love more support in that. The interviews mapped, when I looked at challenges, they also mapped to some of these themes. Also sustainability came in there. And technological innovation, packaging challenges, you know, with the trends in the industry, looking at things like shelf life now that we've got these flavoured beers, we've got premiumisation, we've got low calorie, no alcohol, so the whole no and low trend, and how do we deal with that? So many different pieces of information we were able to put together. So I had the ask now. We felt confident there was some demand there if we could tap into it. The ask was to build a range of programmes, postgraduate programmes in brewing and distilling, to focus on the priority skills, as industry had said they would expect from someone with maybe a postgraduate certificate, postgraduate diploma, or MSc. To look at delivery, that was flexible and preferably recorded, practical classes on site, and I'm not quite sure what happened there, and also to look at funding and low-cost models. So this brought us on to the ideate phase, which I think is actually one of the nicer phases of the programme development process, because it's when you get to take all this information and sit in a room with your colleagues and brainstorm and think of solutions and put forward scenarios and see what works. So it's really about fitting all those jigsaw puzzles together. And as well as that, I think it's important to accept the constraints of the system that you're working in. And naturally, there's a drain on resources, staff are busy, and you have to think about availability and the skills of staff and fitting it all together. But still, we had a wish list and we were looking to achieve as much as possible. Stackable programs built around these priority skills, where the team was in full agreement to this aspect, whereby we had this customised, agile, flexible learning. And this incremental approach did allow the learner to select the level for their own professional development or interest that they wanted to go to and potentially come back in the future. Method of delivery, the agreement was high flex, whereby you have that in-class, live-streamed and also recorded option, because when we talked to our potential learners, a lot of them had shift work and you know they could be working crazy hours, so it was important to have that component. Practical classes on site, and the more challenging part I think was mapping curriculum to different levels, because there were so many different things that industry wanted covered. So sometimes you could look at a module, sometimes you had to fit things in just via learning outcomes. At this stage of the process, this was May 2022, we got notification that we'd received springboard funding for a postgraduate certificate in brewing and distilling. So that kind of expedited our whole prototype, test and implementation phase. So this was the first provision in this area. Each of these modules was validated to be independently a CPD or micro-credential. The work practice module was set up so that you could complete it in your existing company if you were working in the sector, or similarly, if you were new to the sector, you could complete it in a new company. And there was also an exit award if you were not in a position to complete placement at this time. So this, I suppose, first programme was 16 people part-time. We had great interest in it. It was oversubscribed. And based on this, it was built out into a postgraduate diploma. So we applied for HCI funding under Pillar 1 and developed a postgraduate diploma. So you can see the many different pathways now associated with this model. If you want to go part-time, if you want to go full-time. And this is where we are, September 23 to June 2024 for the new programme. So if I had to give a tip, that would be to collect as much data as possible at the empathise phase, so that'll help feed into your defining and your ideation phase. But just to finish on a final thought, and it's that old saying, don't find customers for your product, find products for your customers. If you were answering a solution for industry, you're much more likely to fill your programme and meet the demands. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. That was brilliant, Ciara. I am going to share just a couple of techniques from the development of a postgraduate diploma in digital design from the Creative Digital Media programme based in Blanchardstown. And I'm kind of jumping a couple of phases in the design thinking process. We're kind of at the ideate phase, so we did a ton of secondary research. The team, building upon the experience of the team, we identified demand in the digital design area, and we're interested in exploring postgraduate offerings within that area. And after our kind of secondary research, we kind of clarified a few things before coming up with ideas in terms of learning solutions. And one of the things we clarified was our audience definition. So there's lots of different ways of doing this, personas. We just clarified it in a statement that we wanted to target professionals and recent graduates looking to pivot or advance their careers while working. And TU Dublin would offer the only flexible online digital design master's pathway. So even this clarification that we're maybe interested in learners who are pivoting into digital design or digital careers was an important clarification in terms of how we might kind of ideate solutions. And the unique value that we were proposing at this stage was that learners could complete certificates independently. Okay, so there's a bunch of certificates. They could combine 6 certificates for a postgraduate diploma and then add a professional project to the postgrad diploma to get accredited with a master's. So this is an idea, and we've clarified our audience, and it's just an idea pretty much. And then when we hit a prototyping stage, you're just adding reality or fidelity to your ideas. So you're making them more real. And then you can test those ideas and get feedback on them. And that's what I'm kind of focusing on here. So to add reality to the idea, we mocked up a piece of advertising collateral. That's just one way to prototype. Your reality could be a Microsoft Word document which just explains what your plan of action is. It could be setting up a stand at an open evening or an event and talking to people about what your idea is and getting feedback at that point. So there's multiple ways maybe to add reality to an idea through prototyping. It could be a 90-second recording where you're explaining maybe what the proposal is. So multiple ways of prototyping. Because of maybe the nature of our course, we've all got digital design skills, so we mocked up a piece of advertising collateral. And then recruited 40 participants to complete a survey, and we recruited the participants from multiple sectors and backgrounds and disciplines. So we linked our goals for the survey with our value proposition. And we had 3 kind of main goals in mind. So if we were going to pilot one certificate, maybe what would it be? What are we missing? Again, maybe in the proposals for the certificate. So we had 8 identified, okay? And then barriers that we're not thinking about. So barriers for adoption and enrolment on something like this that we're not thinking about. And when we ran that initial survey to get more data, we weren't super surprised that very popular and in-demand areas like user experience design and design thinking were in demand, okay, from multiple sectors. But we were surprised that from people working in different fields, visual design skills were of interest. So the ability to mock up a prototype, and that is not something that was on our radar at all. We thought maybe more specialized skills. So that was the first big learning from that exercise. Time and money are, the biggest barriers. For about a third of the participants who were randomly recruited from different sectors, the course content not relevant. And then one surprise, one that the university brand was not universally understood. So that was maybe a little outside our control, but something that was maybe a little bit surprising for us, But what was great was that only about a third of complete randomers, the course content was not, that was encouraging, that the course content was not relevant for them. Then again, maybe more focused qualitative interviews with industry partners, practitioners, design practitioners and leaders from companies like LearnUpon and Microsoft, Genesys, Allhuman. And our goals, again, very similar goals. If we were to pilot one certificate, what would be what would be a high value one? What are we missing? So a little bit like the brewing and distilling, what are we missing with the proposition? And then our blockers again. And then because we're a little bit further in the process, maybe who might continue with us in an advisory role or who might be open to guest lecturing on the programme. We interviewed 8 practitioners. Their focus was a little bit different. So they focused on maybe more niche areas of design, like design leadership that just weren't offered in training, wasn't really offered within the sector. But our demand maybe was telling us that visual design was a little bit more important. But we know that people can talk a lot, and what they say, what they do, and what they say they do are completely different things. And we could talk to people, and they tell us they were interested in this and tell us they were interested in that. And that maybe isn't going to progress us in terms of gauging market demand. We put together a market validation hypothesis. So something for people to qualify their opinion a little bit more, and so they might have a little skin in the game. Okay, so they're going to impart something to us. So, if you're putting on an event, a taster, are people going to go? Are they going to maybe leave some contact details so you can follow up an expression of interest? And, we live in a kind of a digital world in our course. So our hypothesis was at least 10% of professionals and recent graduates who visit a landing page for the programme will opt in to register for updates within 2 weeks of circulation. So we would like an expression of interest that you're interested in this, and that is going to help us gauge market demand. You're going to give us some information. We, again, using that marketing material, developed a landing page and added a register your interest facility where people might just share their email address, and we'll follow up then with updates about the course. And shared that within a private LinkedIn group. We didn't hit our target, but we were still encouraged by people who were interested in course updates. Then, as happens in life, there was a change of direction because the opportunity to submit for HCI pillar funding arose. And in our viability section here, our funding model changed. So we were able to use all that discovery from prototyping and testing and our initial secondary research to put together a HCI funding proposal, which was successful. And this week, we have kind of completed the recruitment phase. Okay, so recruitment has been healthy via Springboard. And maybe among the team, we've had some recruitment strategies ourselves. So maybe speaking at events, again, circulating via our LinkedIn networks and prototyping things and putting them out there, and even getting feedback from those few recruitment techniques that we've tried as well, Prototyping is bringing reality to an idea, and it's developing some kind of asset or presence that will help you bring a little bit more data to decision making. And now I am going to hand you over to my colleague Dee, who is going to maybe remind us why failure is a really healthy thing and important. Thank you, Dee.
What not to do. So Ciara had wonderful examples of the perfect scenario and the perfect flow, and it would be great if we all kind of could follow in those footsteps, and it's a great example. Also Niamh went through, but I want to kind of maybe bring the messy truth, or what Claire maybe referred to in the left and the shift left and the fuzzy stage. So I'm going to introduce a bit of that and put my flaws out on the table and take you on a journey that I'm in the middle of and still learning from, so we can, you know, happy to get feedback and suggestions and all the rest of it, but it's real anyway. And I'm taking inspiration from serendipitously. It was at a conference last week. The Learning and Development Institute conference was brilliant, and it was the keynote speaker was Amy Edmondson. It was fantastic, and I love this kind of thinking. For she has this book here that we were kindly gifted, The Right Kind of Wrong, and Why Learning to Fail Can Teach Us to Thrive. Sounds like, tell me more. So I think this is so important, and so I'm just going to borrow the framing of this. As I was sitting in her talk last week, I was like, a borrow for next week to frame this, because it was exactly thinking about everything that I'm going through with this case study at the moment. So she introduced the idea of intelligent failure, which sounds so much nicer, doesn't it, than just failure. Just stick the intelligent in front of it and it's more palatable. And she talks through she says 5 stages. So I think, and again, if talking to mostly a room of academics, I think, and most of us will have involved in program design in some shape or form, or this idea of a new opportunity in a novel territory, but I'll get to my case study, driven by a hypothesis. There's a learning course somebody wants. This point, the 4th one, keeping the cost and scope as small as possible, is probably something that we need to maybe keep in mind. And this is, again, leaning back to Niamh's prototyping and my learning from this case study, is this idea of how can we not go full steam ahead, but actually how can we just dip our toe in the water? So I learning from this, and that's why I was like, cha-ching, when I heard it. And then this most important thing, like all failures, grand to fail, but once we learn from it, that we don't keep sliding through life going, you know, I'm just failing again, you know, here I am, but that we're learning from it. So, again, Amy, plagiarise, borrow. Amy made reference to this quote, and it spoke to me as well, from Krista Corles. She was former CEO of OpenTable. But this idea of early, often, and ugly, the ugly truth. I can handle anything, I can, but early on, rather than before we're all knee deep in having dragged validation processes and people into this whole big kind of foray to realise there's a problem. So I really like this, and this, as I've mentioned before, Informer speaks as a recovering perfectionist, that this idea that things don't have to be perfect was new for me to grasp with, but it's very cathartic to realise that it's okay. And it's just information. So again, that's a really nice way of just borrowing all that to cue me up for my failure that I'm going to share with you. Not quite a failure, but, you know, a learning process. This is an example. So this made me think, if she brought in last week the concept of framing the work and reframing the work, borrowing on Viktor Frankl's work of kind of reframing the situation that you're in. And should there be a communications lecturer in the room, Olivia? So you've got this idea, so it's kind of, you've got your sender and your receiver. I need a course, she needs a course, you know, so that's me on the right. Okay, so I've just been approached by a partner, which we often are in the Enterprise Academy, an enterprise partner, and they come and they might say they need something, what I hear is they need a course. I've got just the course for you, and this can be the problem when we are, I suppose, a little bit institutionalized straight away. She has said nothing about 5 ECT credits in a module that fits in perfectly into this in a 12-week process. She hasn't said any of that, but that's what I've heard already, and I've got the answer for her. So this idea of, this would be the traditional framing, taking it at, you know, the communications message is she needs a course, to what I'm learning along the way through this Enterprise Academy journey and through this learning process is she needs a learning solution. She never said she needed a course, and that I need to go on the journey with her to find out how can we meet her needs and be a useful partnership with the enterprise as a university moving forward. Okay, so to come back to design thinking, I'm drawing back again here and I'm just going to stand on the shoulders of another leadership guru of the last decade before I plunge forward into this process of we need to be more creative and innovative in our failing fast. So let me go to take you on the journey. Okay, so the scenario of this journey. So it started in March. I was approached by a colleague approached me. Actually didn't approach me, it was quite organic. We were talking about what we do at the Enterprise Academy, and it sprung to mind that she actually had a partner that she'd done some work with, and that they had suggested maybe further collaborations. This is actually what we do and is ideal, and it'd be lovely if we had more organic conversations with our colleagues throughout the university, because that's exactly what we're there to do. It was the middle of term, busy term. The idea of actually somebody in the middle of a lecturing term engaging in enterprise engagement is really challenging on top of everything else. So I was like, Grant, okay, can we help you? Can we maybe go on this journey together? So in April, we had a discovery call with the prospect. It was always, moving forward, provided a lovely 2x2 matrix, using some of our sales techniques, following up on it, giving them feedback, really engaging with the process. Again, stuff that lecturers don't necessarily have time to do in their day-to-day academic lives. And, lots of internal stakeholder meetings, making sure everybody was on the same page. It was like a beautiful program mock-up of what we had. Here's one we made earlier, that we have this course that you want. And then in June, even I was like, ahead of myself, getting the validation process going. It was super. This was all roads lead to the traditional accredited certificate. And then we invited the partner to come and visit the beautiful East Quad campus. And that's when, we got a chance to dig deeper into what was being asked and what I was hearing and what actually the road was going to be like. So I suppose it's in that deeper collaboration and conversations, it's back in that sender-receiver model. I heard somewhere along the way, we have a membership of 4,000 people. I was like, 4,000 people? If you gave me 2% of that 4,000 people, we have about 80 students over at the next. This is perfect. So, but then as the conversation unraveled, maybe be lucky to get 0.05% necessarily that could actually do the traditional course and model that I was proposing, but hadn't necessarily been asked of me, okay, so of us. Co-creation, it was all co-partnership. So it's interesting, and it was just a one of those kind of, pivot moments of let's kind of get back to the drawing board and redefine who is the audience. I had kind of probably made an assumption that that this is what they wanted. But had I gone through the process of the design thinking in more depth, I think it'd been quite internal. Their group membership told me this is what they wanted. I talked internally to our team here. But had I actually gone out and talked to who would be putting their money where their mouth is and taking the course, I might have failed sooner than this. But it's not too bad. March to June, July was not too bad of a journey. And realising that this ugly truth, if I wanted to really create a valuable partnership for the school, for the lecturer, for the partner, that we needed to pause and actually go, okay, what do you really need? What do you want? How can we serve you? And let's see from there what could work. And in that pivot, we recouped and got inspired to, instead of saying let's make a course, it was let's offer a workshop. Okay, let's give a taster, a prototype. Let's give them a little flavour of what they could learn about this subject matter. The subject matter was luxury retail principles for designers. So it's quite specifically for the design industry. So that's a different audience to say maybe your business or your retailer, quite specific and niche. So this helped to, coming back to, instead of me trying to jump forward to the implement, I was down at the QA process back in June where I really had to come back down. And luckily this is this design thinking mindset is an iterative process. So I could go backwards to the start and start looking again more closely at actually doing interviews. So it's in combination with the DCCI, which is the Design and Craft Council of Ireland. They pointed me towards the LEOs, they pointed me towards different designers to actually have a conversation with them. And those conversations, those interviews with them is informing how we're designing the workshop, co-designing the workshop, to actually give them value. So listening to what they would want and what would give them value in a half-day taster workshop, which is manageable for us, manageable for them. Don't need to go into any validation process, don't need to bring anybody else on board yet, just like testing the waters and building that doing that relationship building piece. So we're back on that kind of more getting the definition of the audience clearer. And will we get to will I get to implement, or will we get to implement a course? I don't know yet. I don't know. The taster workshop is in January. And we're going to, again, use that as an opportunity to gather more research, gather more information, give them a flavour, get them in through the door of the beautiful East Quad building, get them into, there can be an anxiety for people who haven't engaged in university education for a while of just, realising that it's quite, accessible and useful, dare I say. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. The prototyping stage. So the workshop is the prototyping stage where we'll go. And then you could say, well, what's success and what's failure? Is success, we get the course, is it failure, or will this workshop be an opportunity to learn and improve at a low stakes level? That we've still served the request of the partner that came to us. We've still gone on a journey with them. That we still, they will see us as a partner. And in fact, actually, they reached out and asked could they use our facilities to host for the Irish Design Week. They asked could they use the building to host a really great talk back in November. I knew what they want, but actually pared back, and I'm, wide open to learn. And yeah, let's see where it goes. Thank you.